Greetings, booktubers, and welcome to Sunday Comics. Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Welcome to a Sunday Comics episode of Grammaticus Books, where today we're going to be talking about issue number 407 of the Mighty Thor, which was first published in September of 1989, and ask and rapidly answer the question, is this comic book here, is it Marvel's last gasp? Is it Marvel's last breath of fresh air as a struggling swimmer in turbulent waters before their head goes down underneath these swirling waters of bad business decisions that they were just about to make starting in the 1990s? And the answer to that question is yes, it is. So this particular comic book right here isn't by itself that last gasp, but it is very emblematic of what was going on with Marvel as a comic book company. I just picked this comic book up about a month ago, and I'd stopped buying comic books actively starting in the early 1990s. And the reason I started was because of all these bad business decisions that were just screwing up comic books back then, and I gave up on it. For reasons that I'll go into here later in the video, I went ahead and I picked up this comic book almost by a fluke, by chance, and it just brought back all those memories of how good Marvel Comics was at this time, how much quality that they could put out, and how much they had lost starting in 1990. And this book came out in 1989. It's a solid comic book. It's not the greatest comic book in the world, but it's a very, very good comic book in terms of both its art and the quality of its writing. But even in this comic book, on the front page in particular, you can see the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. You can see the lightning bolts starting to come down as it rolls in. And at the end of this, I'll show you what I'm talking about here, about that storm cloud that is evident even on the front page of this one here back in 1989, and it was a portent of all these problems that were to come. Now, I'm not a comic book historian. I haven't done a lot of in-depth research on this. This is just my opinion, having collected comic books for decades and decades and watched the progress of the industry. And when I got this a month ago, I'd forgotten about all this stuff, and it really brought it back with a vengeance, and that's why I wanted to do this this video here on Sunday Comics about this issue, because this is a really good issue to review this comic book and then talk a little bit about what this comic book represented, which was what Marvel was when it was a good comic book company, and the decisions, the business decisions that you could see coming that are present here at the start of this book. But let's go over this comic book because it's really good. It's an excellent comic book. Here you've got a front cover here. I believe it's by Joe Sinnott. It's not credited, which is really unusual, but I believe that's Joe Sinnott who did the cover work. And Joe Sinnott is listed as the finished artist here in the book, which is really unusual. Joe Sinnott was an inker. He was famous as an inker for Marvel Comics. He inked a lot of stuff for Jack Kirby. And if Marvel assigned Joe Sinnott to ink your comic book, then you knew that they had faith in you because he was considered one of their best inkers. And here, very unusually, he's not only doing the inks, but he apparently is also doing the pencils. And it's excellent. And you can tell that he inked for a long time with Jack Kirby, because it is very reminiscent of Jack Kirby's work there that he's done up here. But he's not just being a Jack Kirby clone, which I like. He's put his own twist on it. He's put his own stylistic, artistic touch to it, and it looks really good. It's nice. It's not the most dynamic pose in the world here with Thor, but it grabs you. It's solid. He's got weight and he's got mass, and he's got a great expression of anxiety as he approaches the adventure that you're about to embark on here. And what is the adventure? The adventure is really interesting because it's an homage to a bunch of Mighty Thor comic book issues from back in 1966. It's an homage to a line of comic books here, starting with issue number 131, which I have here in the Thor Omnibus number 2, which I bought on eBay. I won't tell you how much I paid for it. I paid way too much. I got caught up in auction fever on eBay, and I went way over what I had set for a limit, but this is a fantastic omnibus. And Thor number 407, which we're going to review, it is an homage to the Mighty Thor issues number 131 through numbers 135. And that is the episodes that Stan Lee introduces into the Marvel Universe: the Colonizers of Rigel, the Knights of Wundagore, the High Evolutionary, the Black Galaxy, and the Planet Ego, and the character of the Recorder, who is a robot construct of the Colonizers of Rigel. They all appear for the very first time in those issues in 1966, in issues 131 through 135, and that's a great series. That's a great story arc here in the Mighty Thor. And all of those characters that I just named there in those 5 issues are all contained here in this one slim issue in number 407. Like I said, it's a throwback to 1966, and it's a great homage to that story arc. So here is the setup to it. I'll read it to you. With his friend Eric Masterson, and Eric Masterson was an architect in New York City who Thor, when he's working as a construction worker in New York, befriends, and Eric Masterson eventually becomes Thor, but we're not there yet. With his friend Eric Masterson and a team of genetically accelerated Knights of Wundagore, the noble son of Odin has journeyed into the mysterious Black Galaxy in search of Hercules and the High Evolutionary, who both recently evolved to the point of discorporation, and now he must face the menace of the living universe, which is the Planet Ego and the Black Universe. And the High Evolutionary is in that series over here. He's a person, a scientist on Earth, who has genetically evolved, accelerated the evolvement of all these animals. Think Planet of the Apes, but he's got all types of different types of them, tigers, bears, boars, into human-like intelligent beings. And he creates the Knights of Wundagore. And one of these knights, Count Tagar, has asked Thor to travel to the Black Galaxy to free his master, the High Evolutionary. And also Hercules has been sent there in discorporated form. They got overly evolved in the previous episode. So Thor has agreed to go into the living Black Galaxy, the living universe, in order to free them. And he has a retinue of the Knights of Wundagore with him. And there you have Eric Masterson, who at this point is just a normal human being, an architect, but he's in an armored spacesuit that he can help out in this adventure. The writers on this, the art is Joe Sinnott, like I said. We're really unusual with him doing the pencils, but the story is by Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz, who I've never heard of. So that's a bit unusual. And then you get the splash page here that shows the discorporated High Evolutionary and Hercules there in the background of the Black Galaxy, with Thor and the Knights of Wundagore and Eric Masterson in this just great little Kirby-esque rendition of the Black Galaxy as they get ready to embark on their quest to save them from themselves, essentially, and get them back into their corporal forms. From this point forward, Thor and Eric Masterson and the Knights of Wundagore proceed through the Black Universe, and the Black Universe, which is a living bioverse, starts to throw all of its living beings at them in order to try to stop them. And at this point in the story, all the Knights of Wundagore, they essentially become red shirts in a Star Trek episode, and they take all of the death that happens and most of the destruction occurs to the Knights of Wundagore. They're there just to be the red shirts and the destruction and mayhem that follows. But as they are doing this, back on Rigel number 3, you have the Colonizers, which were also there in issues 131, starting in issue 131. And I love the Colonizers, a great creation by Stan Lee here. Very, very alien-looking and human-looking all at the same time. I think it was a great idea that Stan Lee came up here with the Colonizers. And Rigel 3 is being disrupted. It's suffering earthquakes and disturbances that are emanating out of the Black Galaxy. So down here, the Scientist Supreme from Rigel 3 decides that they have to end the Black Galaxy once and for all, end the threat to Rigel 3, and they're going to send a null bomb into Rigel, not into Rigel, but into the Black Galaxy, that will suck it all in and destroy it all at once. Which obviously would be a problem for Thor and the Knights of Wundagore and Eric Masterson, because they're in the Black Galaxy as the null bomb gets sent into there. And here back in the Black Galaxy, Thor and the Knights of Wundagore continue to fight their way to the discorporated High Evolutionary and Hercules. And also, the Scientist Supreme from Rigel has sent the recorder to record the operation destruction of the null bomb. And the recorder is a friend of Thor's from back in those episodes from 1966. So you're getting the whole gang back together here from that story arc. And it's fantastic. Joe Sinnott continues to show why he is just a master artist. He's got great page layouts. He alternates between faraway shots, mid shots, and close-ups. He knows how to stage the action very well. He's inked it superbly. He's doing the pencils and the inks, so the pencils and the inks mesh perfectly. And the colors are done fantastic as well. You're still doing the four coloring process here in Marvel Comics back in 1989. And the four color process was just using four colors to create up to 64 different hues and shades in a comic book. And those four colors that you used and blended were cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And it made it just pop. You got these very crisp, bright colors. You were limited to 64, and you couldn't blend them like you can today, but they were able to afford to make just the very bright reds and the deep blues, and it gives it this rich feel. And here Thor decides that he needs to pull out his battle armor, and he suits up with the battle armor of Thor, which is really cool. And this is where Eric Masterson realizes that Thor is actually that construction worker that he befriended back in New York City. So he learns the true identity of Thor here in issue 407, and you get to see the battle armor of Thor, the golden battle armor, which is a really cool reveal. And here it is in all its glory, as Thor dons it and goes off to do battle. And you have more combat, wonderfully rendered and executed by Joe Sinnott. Here they continue to fight their way through the Black Galaxy. But up here, you have something important happen that you won't realize at first. One of the Knights of Wundagore, doing his duty as a dutiful red shirt, goes through this membrane that has been sent out by the Black Galaxy and gets turned to dust inside of his armor. And Thor follows through the membrane, but it apparently doesn't affect him. However, at the bottom of this panel down here, you'll notice something different about Thor in this panel. He's sporting a full beard and a mustache that he hasn't had in the rest of the comic book. And that's because this membrane ages anybody who goes through it by several hundred years, which kills the Knight of Wundagore and turns him to dust. But Thor, of course, is an immortal, so it doesn't affect him other than his hair grows out because apparently he shaves. So now they show up. I think all the Knights of Wundagore have been killed off by this point. And then Thor, the Recorder, and Eric Masterson in his space armor continue on. But the Recorder gets cut in half, and the power all gets bled out of Eric Masterson's armor as they approach closer to the planetoid that I'm assuming is Ego, where their friends are being discorporated and held. They ascend up to the top of the planetoid. Thor refuses to abandon the Recorder. He lets him carry him on his back, holding on, even though he's been cut in half, and the Recorder tells him to abandon him just because he's a robot. And he tells him, "You're not just a robot, you're a friend. You're one of my allies, and I'll never abandon you." And he also takes Eric Masterson up to the top, to the summit, where they find the null bomb. And they have to disable the null bomb, and they have containers that are holding the bodies of their friends, the High Evolutionary and Hercules, and there's a Celestial there as well. Convenient that they're all in the same spot, but it lets the plot work, and it makes for a great little shot here by Joe Sinnott with great coloring as well. That really makes that panel pop out. And there's your Celestial, there's your null bomb, and then here's our heroes down at the bottom, along with the containers that are holding the High Evolutionary and Hercules. The null bomb is getting ready to go off, and Thor is able to save it by jumping on top of the null bomb and then using the power of Mjolnir to direct the energy out away from their planetoid and his friends, off out into the universe where it strikes a dying sun down on the bottom. And the power of the null bomb, focused by the hammer Mjolnir, reignites the dying sun, which is kind of poetic. It's nice, but it's also kind of the writers just making up powers for Mjolnir in order to write them out of a corner that I think they had written themselves into. But it does make for a nice little wrap up to the plot. So once they finish that up over here, They're assessing their battle wounds, taking stock of what their sit rep is, and then they notice the Celestial is coming to life. They got bigger problems to worry about than just mere null bombs in the Black Galaxy. They've got a Celestial. And the Celestial apparently blasts them with cosmic rays, with a nice pat tomb. It's a great little sound effect there. And it blows them off on this little asteroid. But it actually, what the Celestial actually does is he restores them all back to their health. He restores and brings back the High Evolutionary, Hercules, and he even puts the recorder back together and then sends them all off safely on this asteroid for some unknown reason. And that wraps up issue number 407 of Thor, which is a really nice, really well done, well written. It's a good, solid story. Fantastic artwork. Here you've got Hercules and the High Evolutionary brought back. Got Thor in the golden battle armor floating in space. What more could you ask for in an episode of the Mighty Thor? Nothing, I say, because this is great work right before it all goes to HE double hockey sticks. And here's the hint that that's coming, that the storm clouds are about to roll over Marvel Comics. And it's right here in this editor's caption, this editorial note, down here on the bottom on page 1. And I'll read it to you. It says, it happened in Avengers Annual number 17. And they're talking about the events leading up to this comic book right here. And what that is, it happened in Avengers Annual number 17. It's a crossover. So this is a crossover comic book. If you're not familiar with crossovers, crossovers were a comic book tool, utensil that they used in order to get comic book buyers and enthusiasts in order to buy more comic books. So this story arc started in Avengers number 17, but if you want to continue to read about this story arc, then you have to go over and buy the Mighty Thor number 407. So it caused comic book buyers to buy more comic books. And that was the whole purpose of a crossover. This crossover actually kind of makes sense because it's an Avengers and Thor's an Avenger. And so that sort of makes sense. But as Marvel was doing these crossovers like this one right here, that dawned on them, they realized that they could expand these crossovers in order to force comic book buyers to buy even more and more books in order to follow their favorite superheroes in their comic books, like Spider-Man. So you'd have Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man who would start a story arc there, but then they would leap it over to somebody else like Daredevil, and then from Daredevil, they would take it over to another issue of another superhero, like, say, Conan the Barbarian. Well, that's a bit out there. It wouldn't be Conan the Barbarian, but somebody like the Avengers, or back over to the Avengers, or the Incredible Hulk. And now you have to buy all these other comic books in order to finish this story arc, in addition to just buying the Amazing Spider-Man. And it increased sales. So they increased the number of crossovers starting in the 1990s. And that's what you see the hint of here, that storm cloud here on page number 1 of issue number 407 in 1989. But they didn't stop there. They continue it by inventing the multiverse. And they make the multiverse just the multi-madness in the 1990s. What's the multiverse? It's all these alternate realities. And what the multiverse allowed them to do was that they could take their most popular comic book characters, their most popular superheroes, like Spider-Man, who was my favorite superhero back in the early 1990s, and they just create all these other slews of different Spider-Man comic books with different Spider-Man heroes who were existing in different multiverses and different realities. And it got so insane that they had to start numbering the different Earths that they had put into existence, and then made the main one, they had to pick one to be the main timeline, which is Earth number 616. So allegedly there's at least 616 different multiverses, 616 at a minimum different Spider-Man in existence out there, and they can make all these different comic books. And it seemed like at one point they had 5 different comic books for the Amazing Spider-Man going at the same time, and it just became madness. And then sort of the final nail in the coffin, at least for me, for buying comic books, why I just gave up on it in the early 1990s, is that they created the pay-to-play tier program, where you had not just this regular cover. This would have been the only cover here for Thor, the Mighty Thor number 407. It's a beautiful cover. They start making variant covers. So now you have not just one cover to Thor number 407, for example, but you might have 3 or 4 different covers, with some of those covers having much lower print runs, making them more valuable. And now if you want all the different covers to this issue, to this episode, this particular issue for September of 1989, you've got to go out and buy 5 different comic books, and one of those comic books might be very hard to obtain. And what this did is it created a speculator's market. It started making comic books into like stock portfolios. And you had all these people come in and started buying these on the speculation that these particular variant covers and these gold and silver and regular editions that they were putting out in order to make things even more complicated and more rare and make it more of like a stock trading commodity, that they just started buying all these up, and it skyrocketed sales. It achieved its purpose of what Marvel wanted it to do, but it was short-sighted because it meant that Marvel now had a volume, a much more large volume of comic books that they had to hire in talent to write for, to ink, to color, to pencil, and create these comic books. And it diluted the talent pool, and the quality of these comic books declined over time, and people got fed up with it. So by the late 90s, they had an absolute crash in sales that hit Marvel Comics, and you had that crash that propagated across the rest of the comic book industry. And it almost tanked the comic book industry in the 1990s. And I got out of it in the early 90s because I got fed up with their tomfoolery, and I wasn't going to go off and buy 5 different comic books just to follow what was going on with my favorite character. Now, I'm happy to say that in the 2000s, or I should say in the year 2025, because in the 2000s, the comic book industry had another major problem hit it that I'm not going to go into here today. That'll be a topic for another Sunday Comics issue. That was the mind virus. That pendulum seems to be swinging back towards normalcy, and you've got comic book companies now that are actually putting out quality comic books in the year 2025 that are actually trying to put out a quality comic book. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you haven't been following comic books over the last decade, then you don't know the insanity that it hit the comic book industry, where they were purposely trying to put out bad product. And I know, as nuts as that sounds, it was actually true. Both Marvel and DC were purposefully trying to make comic books that were going to antagonize their readers, which is absolutely insane. But here you've got Titan Comics, who just got the rights to Conan the Barbarian about a year ago, and they are making a good faith effort to reincarnate and bring Conan back to life, and they have a very good product that they're putting out here. And I think that trend is continuing, and this trend is going to start taking more and more traction, both here in Titan Comics and hopefully at Marvel and DC. And I'm thinking that we might be on the cusp of a comic book renaissance here, moving forward in the last of the 2020s. Let's hope so. I'm crossing my fingers. But I think that's enough for today. That's enough for Sunday Comics. I'm going to wrap this one up. It's late. I'm very tired, if you haven't noticed. And I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.